Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, Chief Storymaker and your host of this podcast. We share stories for many reasons. We want to persuade, we want to entertain, and we want to connect. But what we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're being perceived by the people you're sharing them with. In this series, you'll hear stories that will resonate with you and you'll nod your head in understanding, and then we'll dig into lessons from each of those stories. How many times have you been sharing a story only to be interrupted by a person eager to share his own? Well, when I'm working with clients on communication skills, I remind them to listen for understanding, but not to respond necessarily. But during this podcast, I'm asking you to listen and consider your related stories, and think about which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. Today's podcast theme is the after-conference hangover. I was so excited to start working on some of the ideas I had and to apply what I had learned that I actually arrived early to work the morning I returned from the conference. That's a big deal for me. I love to sleep, and I rarely choose to get up any earlier than I have to. But that morning was different. That week would be different. My job would be different. I was on fire. The conference had been full of great topics, from sales to leadership, from marketing to financial analysis. The keynote session and the breakout session hosted by the keynote speaker were my favorites. The topic was marketing, and he drilled down in the breakout session to help us work through some of his strategies to apply them to our specific goals. He reminded me why I loved that class when I was going through my undergraduate business program. The keynote's excitement for the planning process, the implementation, and follow-up analysis was contagious. I couldn't wait to get back to work and start my own projects. That Monday, I sat down at my desk and penciled in time on my busy calendar to work on a formal marketing plan. When I started that job just a few months before, I dove right in and didn't give myself any opportunity to really think through a strategy to market the hotel. It's as if I had forgotten all of what I had learned in school. I thought that giving myself a set amount of time, maybe 30 minutes each day, would get me to where I wanted to be. I started first thing that morning by looking at available online templates for a marketing plan that would fit the needs of the hotel, and selected a simple but solid format to download. My boss walked in as I was saving it. He was surprised to see me already settled into my day earlier than usual. And in an uneasy, suspicious, fake happy tone of voice, he asked me, "What are you so happily working on first thing this morning?" You know that breakout session I went to at the conference last week? The one on marketing plans and implementation? I'm working on a marketing plan for us to formalize some of what I've been doing and to make it easier to budget, measure the success of what we're doing here. We can't possibly analyze whether what we're spending money on in advertising is working unless we find a way to measure it, right? I've been so busy since I started my job here just trying to make sales and get people in the door, I completely forgot how important this tool can be. He had no idea what I was talking about and erupted at me. "Why do we need a marketing plan? You should be pounding the pavement. Didn't we have this conversation that you need to spend less time on site and more time off site selling?" In less than 10 seconds, my boss had me nearly deflated. I didn't give up, though, because I knew I was on the right track. And every time I had 15 minutes alone in that office, I worked on the marketing plan. I just knew I needed that document to help me stay on track and see the results of my effort at that job. In my optimistic mind, I thought that when I presented the finished product to my boss, he'd appreciate it, and he'd realize why we needed it. I'll save the results of that work for another blog post, but let's just say it wasn't pretty. I tried to keep my enthusiasm that week and the next. Interactions with staff included some discussion of things I learned and ideas I wanted to share from the conference. Some of my colleagues were motivated to work on them. Most just nodded and smiled, assuming my ideas would go away and they could get back to their routines without having to work too hard. Within 2 weeks, I may as well have not gone to that conference at all. I had the after-conference hangover. I had been so excited, so full of motivation and ambition for my job when I returned from that conference, But because my boss didn't understand the why behind my project ideas, my colleagues hadn't been to the conference, hadn't experienced the camaraderie and enthusiasm of the other participants and the speakers, and because I had zero support at work for implementation of new ideas, all of that excitement and motivation just, poof, disappeared. What a waste of time, money, and, well, me. Granted, my boss wasn't great at his job and it wasn't a good work environment in general, but aren't there things I could have done to prevent that deflation of my enthusiasm if I knew in advance it was likely to happen? Now, I am a big believer in attending face-to-face conferences and events, especially when you're particular about the types of events you attend and the people you choose to meet when you're there. There's nothing like that face-to-face learning and interaction with others in your industry, or simply with people who have similar motivation and ambition regardless of industry. Every event is an opportunity to improve yourself and not just gain skills for your current job. But how do we make the most of these conferences? And, more importantly, how do we keep our enthusiasm when we're faced with little to no support and encouragement when we go home and back to our routines? I have a few strategies that I've used in recent years and have found them to be pretty effective when I'm consistent. First, during a conference, I don't try to meet as many people as possible. I try to meet a handful of people and get to know them well. Believe it or not, I'm actually kind of shy, so this isn't as easy as it might sound. I'm sure to attend meals and sit at tables with people I don't know. And there are a few good stories I have in my pocket that I know I can share to make people laugh, especially when I'm in a big city outside of Montana, because people are always curious about Montana. So that's a great topic. And then I simply ask people questions like, where do you live? Did you grow up there? Do you have pets? Do you have kids? Did you get any good nuggets in the morning sessions you attended? Anything you're thinking of working through when you get home? Being a little shy doesn't mean I don't like talking to people. It just means it's not easy for me to walk into a room full of strangers and start talking. The one thing that always works for me is being curious. When I'm genuinely curious about people, they feel it and they respond to that. When I'm asking questions, I'm looking right at the person who's answering, making sure I catch their name. And if they have a name tag on, I look at those written letters and then at his or her face, and it creates a kind of mental image to connect the name with the face, and that helps me remember those names and also some details about the conversation that I have. Sometimes I'll even go back to my hotel room and write notes to myself on the business card that they hand me. So I remember things like what kind of dog they had, how old their kids were, maybe even some little tidbit that they shared with me about something they do with athletic or creative. Asking questions is a great way to know whether that person is going to be enthusiastic and motivated by what they do. And those are the people at conferences that I make special efforts to connect more deeply with. When I attended the government social media conference in Dallas, I met dozens of really motivated, ambitious people that I liked a lot. And I connected more deeply with about 6 of them. More than a year later, I'm still in touch with 4 of those people, and we connect periodically to catch up. They continue to motivate me long after the conference ended. On the last day of that particular conference, 4 of us checked out of the hotel, shared a ride to a Vietnamese restaurant across town, and 3 of us then shared a ride to the airport after that. The experiences of sharing the ride, sharing food, and then enjoying a cocktail together at the airport before we got to our terminals made the connections even more sticky and more real. So why do I pick just a handful of people to get to know well? Because there are those people who help me avoid that after-conference hangover. That's the other part of my strategy, to keep in contact with that handful of people. If I met a lot of people, and that was my goal, how likely is it that I could keep in contact with a majority of them? I'm more strategic about it now. When I return from a conference, I go straight to my calendar and I schedule follow-up calls with the people I connected with. I also schedule time each week to work on whatever really excited me at the conference, even if those were not directly related to my current job. It was when I was planning the first No Longer Virtual conference in Atlanta in 2017 that this concept, the after-conference hangover, really took shape in my mind. After so many years of attending conferences and planning events, I had a lot of ideas about what I didn't want for No Longer Virtual, and one major component was to include strategies throughout the conference to help participants avoid the after-conference hangover. That included making sure that everyone in the room had contact information for each other and specific communication plans and strategies following the event. Because participation is limited to 50 people, every person had the opportunity to meet the facilitators and other participants and truly connect with them. Think about the value of that room full of advocates for you, your career, and your business. When you keep in contact following an event, you develop ambassadors for your brand. The relationships that are built in that short time create a sustainable energy long beyond the final session. So the next time you're investing time and money to attend a conference, think about how you'll be able to sustain the motivation and inspiration after you get home. Set aside time to work on those projects. Don't let that energy dissipate. If you're intrigued by my description of the No Longer Virtual events, please visit my website, elkinsconsulting.com, for more information. Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
Now listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going away?